They say the Lord of Argens died halfway through the winter of 1347. Not because of war, not because of plague, but because his wife, Lady Seraphine, fell from her horse in a field covered in silent frost. Her neck snapped. Blood froze on the snow. The servants found her in a crimson dress, her hair tangled as if the wind had tried to pull her into another world, one not meant for the living. When they carried her body back to the castle, villagers lit white candles along the road, not for ceremony, but because the wind in Argens had stopped blowing that day, and the Lord refused to mourn. Not because he didn't grieve, but because he refused to accept. In the first days after her death, Alaric wore his wedding coat. He sat outside her locked room for 3 days and nights. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He stared at a mirror, the same one Seraphine once used each morning. He waited, as if she might return through the glass. He did not allow anyone to bury her. Instead, he placed her body in a glass coffin, surrounded it with lilac flowers, set it in the grand hall. Every night, he ordered the wedding music to play again. And under candlelight, he danced slowly with no one. One step, one breath, one memory. And every night, he whispered her name into empty air. When spring returned, he began looking for someone, not to love, to replace. The first girl was a shepherd. She had gray eyes and pale golden hair, just like Seraphine when she was young. She was brought into the castle dressed in white, bathed in rosewater, and called by a name that wasn't hers. She didn't understand until the third day. She looked at a painting on the wall and saw her own face wearing someone else's dress. "Seraphine," Alaric said, "you've come back." Then she vanished. No one saw her leave. No one spoke her name again. A month later, another young woman arrived, taller, thinner, still resembling the late Seraphine. This one was taught to sing, to laugh softly, to walk slowly, to fold her hands just right. Alaric rebuilt the wedding room, hung back the original bridal veil, lit silver candles again, and she, too, disappeared. Right after he called her Seraphine in his sleep. 12 women, each with something that reminded him of her. A mole on the right shoulder, a voice that broke gently when laughing, a way of turning the head at dusk. None of them returned, but something else appeared. The villagers noticed new statues in the gardens, not of Seraphine, but of different women. Their faces strange, their eyes empty, their mouths slightly parted, stone among roses. A traveling stonemason once told this story. He said he was hired to carve a woman's face based on a painting. But when he arrived, there was no painting. Only her name was Mira. She had no family, no real memories, nothing left to lose. When the guards asked if she knew where she was going, she said, "I know I look like the dead wife, and I want to be remembered like her." They laughed, but they let her in. That night, Alaric watched her from behind the velvet curtain. She did not bow. She did not smile. She did not pretend. She stood still and said, "I'm not Seraphine, but if you want me to become her, then teach me." Alaric smiled, the first smile in 2 years, and that's how their story began. Not with love, but with agreement. She would learn to become someone who had already died, and he would learn how to forget that he was the one who killed her. Her name was Mira. She had no family, no real memories, nothing left to lose. When the guards asked if she knew where she was going, she said, "I know I look like the dead wife, and I want to be remembered like her." They laughed, but they let her in. That night, Alaric watched her from behind the velvet curtain. She did not bow. She did not smile. She did not pretend. She stood still and said, "I'm not Seraphine, but if you want me to become her, then teach me." Alaric smiled, the first smile in 2 years. And that's how their story began. Not with love, but with agreement. She would learn to become someone who had already died, and he would learn how to forget that he was the one who killed her. They stopped calling her Mira after the second day. The maids greeted her as "my lady." The man who brought breakfast said "Madame." The etiquette teacher only whispered, "Seraphine used to sit straighter." Mira didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't argue. She only watched. In her new room there were no mirrors, only paintings, 12 of them, lined along the cold stone wall. Each painting showed a woman in a red dress. Each face was different, but the eyes were the same, empty. They said these were Seraphine, different phases of her life. But Mira knew something was wrong. Some features looked too much like hers, and some eyes seemed to follow her when she moved. Lessons began at sunrise. The old tutor with dust-colored hair carried a black book. Inside were exact records of how Seraphine moved, how she walked, how she held her breath, how she smiled without showing teeth, how she never stepped forward with her right foot, how she never cried in front of a man. The second lesson was scent. Women in gray robes brought boxes of cloth soaked in oils, mint, lilac, burned sandalwood, amber, and dried blood. Mira was blindfolded. She had to guess which scent Seraphine had loved. Then they poured that scent into her hair, pressed it into her dress, stuffed it into her pillow. Even during meals, the scent clung to her throat. That night, she slept wrapped in the smell of a woman she had never met, but was becoming. By the second week, Alaric entered her room for the first time, not with warmth, not with hunger, but with the eyes of a man searching for a ghost inside flesh. "Stand up," he said. "Walk toward me. Call me by your old name." She walked, but instead of obeying, she asked, "I haven't learned enough to be Seraphine yet, but if you want me to act like her, I need to know something. Who killed her?" The room fell silent. Cold sank into the stone. Alaric didn't answer. He turned and left. The door echoed behind him like stone cracking in winter. That night, Mira woke to whispers behind the walls. Not voices, not words, just broken sounds, like wind slipping through an open grave. She crept barefoot down the corridor. She found a hidden stairwell behind a swan tapestry. It spiraled into darkness. The air below was still, but it smelled like wet stone and memory. The chamber below was too clean. That was the first wrong thing. No dust, no cobwebs, no rot, just lit candles and pine sap. 12 pedestals stood in the center. Each held a statue, not of Seraphine, but of the women Mira had seen in the paintings. Each statue had a name. Her Grace Seraphine, and a year, 1348, 1348, 1350, all the way to 1358. One woman for every year since Seraphine died. Behind them was a door, heavy, but unlocked. Inside was a small room, a bed, a writing table, and a box. Inside the box were pieces, a handkerchief with the letter M, a broken silver ring, a ribbon dark with dried blood, and a note. I was Seraphine 1355. My real name was Leora. If you find this, please break the cycle. Mira collapsed. Now she understood. Alaric didn't believe they were Seraphine. He didn't care. He wanted the feeling, the thrill of loving her again, and losing her again. Every year, the mourning, the ritual, the illusion. Death was not an accident. It was the pattern. She left the chamber empty, but filled with knowing. 3 nights later, Alaric came to her room. "You've become her," he said. "Tonight I remembered how she breathed in her sleep. It was just like yours." He touched her cheek. She didn't move. He whispered, "She once asked if I loved war more than her, but all I could remember was the dress she wore that day." He wept, quietly, like something broke that had been waiting to shatter. Mira said what she was trained to say. "You always cared, just in your own way," and he believed her. 3 days later, a second wedding was held. No priest, no music, only 12 statues watching from the garden. Mira wore the red dress, the same one Seraphine had died in. The blood stain at the wrist was covered with lace. Alaric offered his hand. She took it. They danced in silence, and the wind finally returned to Arjun's. But Mira did not smile, because under her pillow she had found a note. "You are the 13th, but not the last. If he stops believing, you will become stone." Mira did not sleep that night. After the wedding, Alaric kissed her forehead. Not warm, not cold, just a gesture, like closing a book with no words inside. She sat in silence until dawn. In her hands was the note, "You are the 13th, but not the last." The next morning she followed the whisper. The castle walls were old and quiet, built to hold secrets, but willing to leak them to those who listened. She found the crack behind the swan tapestry. There, a spiral staircase sank into darkness. No torches, no light, only the sound of her breath and the stone receiving it. She descended slowly, one step, then another, then silence. The air was cold, but not dead. It smelled like pine and memory, and something too clean to be forgotten. The chamber was not dusty, it was spotless, tended, prepared, and in its center stood 12 pedestals. Each one held a statue, not of Seraphine, of others. Women, different faces, same expression, now statues for my word. Still, empty, gone. Each statue carried a title, Her Grace Seraphine, and a year, 1348, 1349, 1350, year after year after year, until 1358, 12 women, 12 failed returns, and now Mira. At the far end stood a heavy wooden door. She pushed it open. Inside was a narrow room, a bed, a desk, a box. Inside the box were remnants, a handkerchief with the letter M, a cracked silver ring, a ribbon, dry and dark, and a final note. I was Seraphine, 1355. My name was Leora. If you read this, break the cycle. Mira's knees gave way. The cold entered her bones, but not from fear, from truth. Alaric was not mad. He knew they were not Seraphine. He wanted the ritual, the illusion, the beginning and the end, on repeat. He didn't want her, he wanted to lose her again and again. Death was not the price, it was the purpose. Mira rose, calm, quiet. A part of her turned to stone, but the rest remained awake. That night, Alaric entered her room again. "You have become her," he said. "You even smell like how she once did." He placed a hand on her shoulder. She did not move. He spoke softly. "She once told me she feared becoming a statue. How strange, that I now live surrounded by her likeness." Mira looked ahead, still, steady, and said only what she had been taught. She was never afraid, only waiting. He believed her and left. Later that night, she returned to the chamber. No one saw her go. She carried nothing but her own silence and something sharp. One by one, she stood before the statues. Seraphine 1348, Seraphine 1349, Seraphine 1350, each one silent, unmoving, each one a name given to someone who had no choice. Then came her own, unmarked, incomplete, waiting. She did not weep. She picked up a chisel and carved a single line into the base. "I am not Seraphine, I am Mira, and I am the last." She lit the flame. Not fast, not wild, slow, crawling, final. Stone cracked, smoke curled. 12 names burned into ash. The chamber filled with light for the first time in years. When Alaric arrived, everything was gone. The pedestals, the faces, the cycle, nothing remained but soot and silence. And Mira was no longer there. The villagers said they saw a woman walking toward the river. Hair cut short, hands darkened by fire, eyes clear like someone who had made a decision. A week later, a half-burned statue washed ashore on the far side of the kingdom. Its face was cracked, but one side still smiled. No one rebuilt the castle of Argans. No one spoke the name Seraphine again, because everyone understood each time someone said it. They might be calling the wrong soul. Years passed. The castle remained a silhouette on the hill, empty, unspoken. People built new paths, avoided the road to Argans, even when the fields were rich there. They said the earth remembered, and some things should not be disturbed. But one spring, a traveler came, not old, not young, with eyes like ash and hands like wind. He carried a satchel and a small journal. In it, names, 12 of them, crossed out, and one still waiting. He reached the river at dusk. There he found a statue, cracked, weathered, but still upright, half-burned. He knelt before it, traced the cheek with his fingers, not out of worship, out of recognition. He opened his journal, wrote a final line beneath the last name, Mira, set free. Then he rose. Let the book slip from his hands into the water. The pages soaked, curled, vanished downstream. Behind him, the statue remained, but its face seemed softer in the twilight. He turned and walked east, to no town, to no name, only a way. That night, a breeze swept through the valley, soft, warm, carrying nothing but silence, the kind of silence you hear after a final word has been spoken, and no one needs to speak again. And in the shadow of the broken castle, a tree bloomed. For the first time in 100 years, not white, not red, but gold, like memory, like truth.